Really excited to introduce the second workshop. For those of you new to the room, my name is Jeff Bowman, CEO of the Ames Institute. I'm going to be doing a workshop in a little bit in this room. But my job is to introduce these fine two gentlemen up here. This workshop will be on tips related to 35 years of investing in small businesses. And I'm pleased to introduce Brendan and Andrew. Brendan Anderson is the founder and CEO of ScaleCo Capital. He spent 25 years operating and investing in small businesses. As the founder and managing partner of ScaleCo, he focuses on deal sourcing, strategy development, vision building, fundraising, and investor relations. Brendan has primarily worked in the lower middle market throughout his career. In 2006, co-founded Evolution Capital Partners, ECP, and has invested over $100 million in 16 platform companies. He's originally from Alliance, Ohio, holds a BA in economics from DePaul University and an MBA in finance from Loyola University. There we go. It's my Canadian accent coming out. And Andrew Newsome has served as a VP of ScaleCo Capital and VP of Operations for Innoplast, one of the ScaleCo portfolio companies. While at ScaleCo, Andrew has focused on talent development, sourcing over 20 CEO candidates for portfolio companies and deal execution. Prior to joining ScaleCo, Andrew had corporate development roles for a large restaurant holding company and management consulting at ZS Associates. Andrew graduated from Vanderbilt and was recently honored as a Forbes 30 Under 30 Cleveland honoree. Help me in giving these two gentlemen a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I chuckle. Cheryl is. We're kind of the far other side of Riverside. Can you ever hear me? Okay. They're probably $12.5 billion. We're managing about $300 million, so we're really, really close to each other. But we're trying to buy, partner, and build companies that the people like Riverside would want to buy. So that's kind of a, kind of a differentiator, kind of starter in the marketplace. We're hoping to make this very interactive. You'll find we have a kind of an entrepreneurial style to us, and so stop us at any time. We are going to pass around a microphone, I guess. That was something we learned from the last session. Thanks, Cheryl. And let me ask, how many searchers are in this audience? I'm just kind of curious, like kind of maybe a mark. Okay, a little less than I was hoping for, but we'll get there. Look, you want to flip the title? We had kind of picked this title. We were sitting around kind of wondering about, what is it, the message we want to deliver, and we kind of came up with is it's all up to you, or it's all on you. And I think it's just something that when you're out there running a small business, you fail to realize all the things that you have to do. I think about the lack of resources that I had when I first bought the business, and you think so much stuff. I worked for a larger bank, and I'd worked for some other bigger companies, and it's just one of these kind of punchlines of, holy moly, you may have wonderful people, but you've really got to make sure that things are getting done. We'll roll the next one. I started my career in 1995. I was a little offended when I read Andrew's title of 35 years of investing, because he must be adding his 7 to my 28. But thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it. I was mentioned earlier, I was working for a bank, and I would frequently go to my boss and say, yeah, we should buy this company. And he's like, Brendan, banks can't do that sort of stuff. So he, kind of kindly convinced me, or tried to suggest that I go and buy my own company with the help of him and his friends. I was living in Chicago at the time. We found a bankrupt industrial park, so I wouldn't really call it a company, but it was the thing that kind of got me, as he said, in the game. It was he always said, God can't steer a parked car. You got to get moving at this if that's what you want to do. We have been actively involved in 23 platform investments. So, it seems like a lot, but compared to like a Riverside, it's really not that much. And we'll kind of go through kind of more of the background. In 2018, I formed ScaleCo Capital with really the goal. We had been doing deals, you'll get into a lot more of this later, but really the goal of kind of focusing locally, kind of backing up on this kind of the smaller, kind of longer term mindset capital. Joke that it's actually a fact. When I originally picked the name ScaleCo Capital, it stood for Scale Community. We still own the domain, and couple of my investors were like, that's way too nonprofit, and they thought it was the wrong message, so we truncated it to ScaleCo. We'll also kind of talk to you a little bit later about some space we're creating in Midtown. With that, I'll also introduce Andrew Newsome.
Hey everybody, Andrew Newsome. Got the first foray into ETA actually working for a large restaurant group called Flynn Restaurant Group, where Greg Flynn back in the 90s acquired 12 Applebee's and now grown the portfolio to over 2,000 restaurants in the portfolio here internationally. That was my first time seeing and understanding what ETA was. So wanted to learn everything about the search fund model, ended up interviewing over 70 searchers, and wanted to get some experience operating before taking that leap. So spent some time at McMaster-Carr running their distribution warehouse in Aurora, Ohio. Was planning to do the traditional search model and try to go to one of these schools that has an ETA program, but was fortunate to be introduced to Brendan and was able to have a kind of a three-part role where I got to evaluate talent, find more people to help run ScaleCo companies, actually work on deals and lead some of our deal execution efforts, and then most recently as head of operations for one of our portfolio companies, Innoplast, which is a traffic safety distribution company that makes bollard covers and speed bumps and speed humps and all that stuff. As Brendan mentioned, we're pretty casual. We really want to make sure that you get a lot out of this presentation, but want to save a lot of time for Q&A. So if questions come up, feel free to let us know, and we'll be saving a lot of time at the end to answer a lot of questions that come up.
I also want to say, we stand up here and, it may appear that we know what we're talking about, but all I can tell you is that we've just tried a lot of stuff. And so we far from knowing what we're talking about, but we were more than happy to share our experiences.
So ScaleCo has really been focused on finding long-term partners with a very entrepreneurial mindset. Brandon will get into more specifics about the story, but really was able to find the right partners who were willing to back him back in the late 90s and have taken that entrepreneurial spirit to what we do at ScaleCo. And we continue to look for partners, whether it's operators, investors, lenders, bankers, who fit that long-term mindset of growing and scaling smaller organizations.
So I'm already going to go off script. I think what's fun about kind of with this idea of staying local is somebody like Andrew, who I think we had been talking for a year or so. He wanted to make the leap, and we didn't really know kind of what role he would play, other than we knew he was talented. He knew he could do a lot of different things, and so he originally kind of helped us get the word out, or start to get the word out in Cleveland, in the area. He took on an operating role, putting in an ERP, changing pricing, consolidating 4 facilities into 1 facility, a company that's grown from about $6 million to $22 million. We have another big acquisition that'll take it to 35 or 40, and that's 29, 30 years old, a person that's kind of played a lot of those roles. And so we have a similar I think if you kind of look at some of the people that are coming in the organization, they're kind of moving around, moving into the portfolio, moving back and forth, and so it's very entrepreneurial. We have a young gentleman who left as a Navy SEAL and worked with us for 3-4 months, and now he's kind of the number 2 or 3 person in a brand new deal we just did, Safety Control Technologies in Middleburg Heights. I get my heights mixed up, but anyways. I'll go to the next one, try to get back on track. Just brief background of kind of how I got started. I mentioned I was a banker. In 1995, my boss kind of uncovered this bankrupt industrial park. It was a deal where, I think about it, it was, I guess at the time 29 years old, we found it, kind of structured it, and put 3.6 million. 1998, 3.6 is still a lot of money, but in 1998 that was a boatload. Relatively quickly returned about 12.6 million. We're very active. Operational. I mean, it was a deal that had some distressed debt, had distressed bonds. It was I was day to day, kind of figuring that stuff out. 1998, through an ad I put in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, back when people read the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I'm sorry, they read it, but it was actually in a paper form, at the end of your driveway. The ad I ran was, do you want to buy out your boss? And what I was looking for, I felt I could add some sales, and I felt I could add the financial side of the world, but I needed somebody that knew how to run the company. A guy named Kent Marvin replied to the ad, and we bought that business in 1998. We bent and fabricated large diameter tubing, and it eventually kind of became a lifestyle business, or kind of a business that funded a lot of the things that we'll talk about today. I actually owned that business for almost 20 years. Sold it in 2017. The sale price was about 9.1, but I feel like I got a lot more value out of that at the time. 2001, the pictures up here are really hopefully to try to show the changes that were made. Hard to do in a picture, especially when I was using like an old camera. But in 2000, you can see from the industrial park. It was we had hard to find good pictures. In STAM in 1998, we started off down here in a 28,000 square foot facility in Grand River, Ohio. Ended up in a 75,000 square foot facility in Mentor, and that's kind of storing indoors and outdoors. 2001, we started a de novo bank. It seemed like the thing to do. Was that we had some space in the industrial park. We had a lot of customers, and we had been banking. And it's actually kind of embarrassing. This picture down here, I tried to get so close to it because you couldn't tell it's actually a trailer. There's a double wide trailer, so I didn't want to have everybody feel like that there was, that it was actually a bank at a trailer, but it was. And then that was the bank building we built. But it was a deal where we started like $5.2 million of equity, and eventually kind of sold it at a great time in 2007 for about 3 times that. But the goal of kind of going through some of this background is really to talk about, this is. I mean, if you walk through STAM in 1998, it wasn't a very glamorous place. 2006, we formed for the first Evolution Fund, invested in 16 companies, 109 million in equity capital. We've already returned about 246, and we've learned a lot. I do have a bias towards remembering the good deals as opposed to the bad deals, but brag about one company locally, the Accurate Group, again, a deal that I put an ad in the paper. A guy was saying, "You want about your boss?" Paul Doman in Chagrin Falls replied to the ad. We got together, and he had a vision for creating what he called a real estate transactional services business. He actually knew of a platform to go buy. We went and bought it. We put $3.2 million in, and fast forward to today, we never put additional equity. It's got 600 employees. It's a pretty neat little company. With that.
So here are the topics we're going to discuss in more detail today. I just wanted to show them up here as a summary. But really, a lot of what Experience has found is it's kind of on you to figure out, as an ETA entrepreneur, the path forward. And that may mean finding creative ways to find companies. Wonderful ways to find great brokers and bankers, but Brendan was able to find success putting multiple ads in the paper and that being successful. So oftentimes you may want to think creatively about how you can best reach out to different brokers. We'll spend a lot of time talking about finding the right people in the community. Going on the ETA path can be a lonely proposition, and so finding other entrepreneurs, folks in the community who understand the ETA process can be really helpful. And we'll talk about some of the long-term partners that Brendan's found along the way. At the end of the day, in that CEO seat, the buck stops with you, and a lot of this is going to be on your responsibility. We found sometimes folks who are coming from larger enterprises may not understand fully the just amount of detail that is required to really run the day-to-day of a small operation, and that's a big part that we'll touch on. With the next point, it's a detailed game. We're going to talk about why details matter, particularly when it comes to cash flow, and then finally the importance of having a long-term mindset. ETA, I think, is a great way to generate wealth, but it's not an overnight game. It takes a lot of work to grow and scale companies over time. So we'll talk about having that long-term mindset and how that's worked well for Skillco. So starting with the key point, having an ownership mindset. Moving from a large organization to a small organization, you're likely going to be taking on a lot more responsibility. When I was, for myself, when I was at McMaster-Carr, I led a team and had a lot of employees and thought I knew everything. But it's very different when you're responsible for making a lot of the key decisions. Some of the smaller ones, actually getting back and helping folks learn how to pack the ballers correctly. So you get really involved in the day-to-day operations as a ETA entrepreneur. I think it's a great way to learn the business, but that's something that not everyone understands, just how involved it is at the lower level. It's also important to have what we call both the telescope lens and the microscope. Oftentimes, you're looking at the long-term value creation. Where's this business going to be in 5 to 7 years when you plan to exit? And it's important to be able to talk to investors and other folks in the community about that to get folks excited. But it's also important to be able to zoom in and understand what day-to-day operations look like and how those daily interactions are going to get you to your ultimate goal. It's important to have both of those lenses when in the entrepreneur or CEO seat. And then to that point, as an ETA entrepreneur, you'll wear many hats. You're usually the chief salesperson, both internally and externally, with customers and employees. You'll have the kind of analyst or capital allocator lens, where it's important to understand, once you've generated cash, how do you use the cash most effectively to continue to grow and scale the business? You'll be the head operator, really managing the day-to-day, and then focusing on cash flow and making sure the numbers look accurate. So it can be a lot of different hats, but in that ETA seat, in that role, you are responsible for many different types of buckets.
The bottom here, we talk about kind of peer groups and groups like Promise Partners and YEO, YPO, Vistage, and so forth. And all I can tell you is that it's been a big part of my life. Was an EO for 20 years. I've been in Vistage for 4 or 5. I've done strategic coach, and I can just tell you that there's no better advisor to business owners or people trying to run a business than other business owners, because they're there, they understand the impact, they have the contacts, they know people to refer you to, and it's just been. There was I believe this to be true. Almost every big decision or kind of idea that's come to me has largely come through, kind of one of those discussions, because you actually get pretty real. And so I would just encourage people, whatever peer group you want to be a member of, find them and keep looking for, for the right sorts of people to be with.
Next, just going back to our detail point, cash flow really matters in these smaller businesses, and so we wanted to share an example of why that's the case. And you hear a lot of folks talk about EBITDA, right? And that's usually how businesses are valued, but EBITDA can be very different from cash flow, and it's important to understand those differences when evaluating opportunities. So on the left, we look at 3 companies, all that have 500,000 in EBITDA. They have different working capital cycles. So the first company is what they call negative working capital, where maybe it's a software company where they're collecting money up front from customers even before having to pay their suppliers. In this case, low inventory requirements, only 50,000 in inventory, and accounts payable about 150,000. So that's what we consider negative working capital. There's a middle one where we consider lower working capital. It's a little bit more receivables and inventory, but still lower. And then we have another business, which maybe manufacturing or distribution, where you have more inventory, in this case about 6 times more inventory, and you may have more customers on payment terms, so you have a larger receivable balance, in this case $950,000. You fast forward and the businesses all grow 50%, and you keep those same kind of percentages of working capital, you'll see there's very different outcomes. So for example, the company with negative working capital is able to actually decrease consistently its working capital, which ultimately will lead to more cash in the business, while the company with the higher working capital now has 1.4 million receivables, 900,000 in inventory, and that's the cash that you don't have, right? You had to pay more money to have stuff sit on your warehouse. You're still waiting longer to get money from your customers on the receivable balance. And so despite EBITDA going up, call it $250,000, they've actually increased their working capital by $700,000. And over time, that's going to put a really big strain on cash. So while you're growing, at some point, you may actually run out of cash to support that growth. And so it's really important to think about cash flow when evaluating and running a business.
I'll use 2 examples. We had a business called Turf Ventures, and they were a golf course chemical distributor. Going into the deal, we knew they had some pretty bad working capital cycle, but I was naive enough to believe I could change it. And didn't work. They basically would sell their products. They'd sell the whole years of golf course chemicals in November, December. They would deliver their product in the spring, and the clubs would pay them in the following summers. And sometimes not till the end of the summer when all the membership dues got paid. We thought we could do more of a subscription service type of thing. Didn't work, and that's something that maybe Scaleco do that Riverside wouldn't, but I'm just kidding, Cheryl. It doesn't work sometimes, but it was a business that we really couldn't grow because there wasn't enough cash to do what we needed to do. Actually sold that back to management, and it was, and they've done a decent job kind of growing it at a moderate pace. The Accurate Group, which I talked about earlier, would be a different story. When we originally got into it, we were having cash flow problems, just kind of because it was growing so aggressively. And the CEO had an idea where he went to the banks. Our customers were banks and title insurance companies and things like that. And he basically said, well, why don't we collect our fee at the real estate closing? And so went from having receivables that were 45, 60 days out to having almost no receivables. And we were able to kind of put our payables out 45, 60 days. So it was a company that could actually produce cash while it was growing. And that's a big difference in figuring those things out.
We also talked about having a long-term mindset and really want to dig into...
If anybody has any questions, to stop us.
Yeah, anytime we're happy to answer any questions. Again, we'll save some time at the end as well for any questions on any of this stuff. Talking about having a long-term mindset, wanted to put some thoughts on what that really looks like. And it really starts with having long-term processes or ways that you can continually grow and develop the business. The first is having some kind of operating system. We like EOS. There's a lot of different ones out there, but having some process that's going to allow you to set strategic goals for the future, but also kind of plan the days and weeks ahead. Having a system in place to do that is really, we found essential to making sure you're constantly making progress so you get the long-term exit you're looking for. Same thing with the budgeting process. A lot of times when we go into companies, they may not have been previously looking, 2-3 years in the head when it comes to financials. And as we mentioned, cash flow is important. So really creating a process around what should we be doing? How many new people, if we want to have these long-term growth goals, how many people is that going to require? And really thinking strategically, if you know you want to be somewhere in 5 years, working backwards from a budgeting standpoint of what that looks like. Same thing in hiring. It's you want to find folks that understand the long-term vision. I think people is an important part of this whole process that may not get talked about enough, but finding those hires that you believe can be on your team long-term is pretty essential early on. Second is just the long-term mindset. It's really important to know where you're going. Do you want your business to be a $100 million exit? Are you looking for a business that can take good money out of the business every year, may not grow as much, but can be a really nice lifestyle business where you can be less hands-on in the future? You'll make different decisions in the business based on what your long-term goals are, and that can be different based on your personal desires. So just understanding that and asking yourself, what are you hoping to achieve with your ETA path is really important. How are we going to track progress? What does good look like? How do we continue to make sure that we are good? And how does that change over time? Understanding what metrics and targets to use is also really important there. Really building on long-term relationships, whether it's banks, investors, lawyers, due diligence providers, even employees. It's important to have people who you can kind of go back to consistently. And Brendan will talk in a moment about how some of those long-term relationships have been really important in his career, but trying to think through how do I build these relationships for the long term is really important. And then finally, just the long-term value creation plans. There's a lot of different ways to create value in a small business, whether it's increasing revenue, reducing costs, finding other add-ons that can grow into the portfolio, paying down debt, or hopefully getting a multiple expansion. If you have an idea of how you envision that exit, you can again step backward and start kind of thinking through the day-to-day of how you get to this long-term option.
My turn. As I was sitting here listening in your talk, I think of a couple big relationships that we've been able to kind of gather. And what I would encourage everybody, and as much as I love Cleveland, what I would say is it's not the greatest hunting ground for various capital and some other things, as much as I love it, and we're hoping to change it. Our biggest investor, it's been 15, 16 years. I read a book. The book was called No Man's Land. Author was a guy named Doug Tatum. It basically describes the issues around small companies and why they can't grow and why people read it. My criticism of Doug is he doesn't really answer the problem. He just kind of outlines the problem. But I wrote Doug and went down and visited him. He was, at the time, he was the director of, or a professor of entrepreneurship at Middle Tennessee State. He's at Florida State now. But he introduced us to a large European family that his business company's been around for 150 years. They make crystal glass, if you can back into that one, in Austria. And they have been our biggest investor, they and their friends. And it was one of these things where, I got to know them through the author, and he just was, and they've just become really good friends of ours. We were just over, and so that was because I took the initiative to write the author. It's one of the things we like to do. 12, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, wrote Doug Tatum, wrote Gino Wickman, who's the author of Traction. I got certified as a EOS integrator, and it was something that, kind of helped us change how we look and feel and run these companies. And so, also have an investor that's invested in, when I was 28, I remember pitching him. I put my suit and tie on back in the days when people wore ties, and went and pitched them. And I remember going to, kind of had my presentation, and I walk into his office in Chicago, and his assistant said, he's not here. And I'm under my breath, I'm sure I said something unpleasant. And she said, but here's a check. And he had written in there, this is a marker, do well here and we'll do bigger things. He's invested in every single deal we've ever done. And so today's family office is a lot bigger, and so forth. So it really comes down to, now I'd also say that there's been some negative experiences, right? And all I can say is that it's if you just know the person isn't right or the group's not right, you're better off moving on, even if the deal sounds fantastic. We've had investors that have promised us crazy stuff, and deep down you just don't feel, you feel something's wrong. It's better to move along. So that's what I got there, Andrew. Just off the cuff.
Speaking of investors, the number one question that we get from folks who are looking to be ETA operators, whether it's Scaleco in general, is what do investors look for when they are looking for CEOs or searchers to back? So we want to put in a couple of categories of things that we found effective, and we're looking when evaluating folks for Scaleco companies. Start with really this temperament motivation. Is the person humble, hungry, people smart, passionate about entrepreneurship? Those are the Scaleco core values, and it's a very detailed game. So someone who's going to be hungry to search for knowledge and details is really important for us. Humility, I think, is also very important. Oftentimes we're backing folks who are going to be CEOs for the first time and may have really, really great operational expertise or subject matter expert in their industry, but they're learning as well. So finding people who are open to learning and coaching has been really important for us as well. Most business problems, end of the day, come down to people. So people who are people smart, emotionally intelligent is also something we look for. And then this path definitely is not for everybody. So finding people who really want to be entrepreneurs and have that spirit, and it's essential for us as well. In terms of other skills, understanding finances and being analytical is helpful. I don't think anyone has to be an Excel wizard to be successful. It can help, but really someone who's going to want to understand the numbers and understand how value is created. We'll share a lot of resources around that, but it's important for folks to at least want to be strong analytically. In terms of the softer skills, integrity is incredibly important. There will be times where you have to have tough conversations with investors or employees, and people who are going to do that with grace and honesty is really important. And just being able to be a strong and effective communicator is also important. You'll be communicating to a lot of different types of folks, whether it's employees or lenders, or if you have investors, and you may have to tailor your communication style for those different groups. So people who are able to be adaptive communicators is also really important. And then where we can, one of the best ways to see if someone will be successful is if they've been successful in the past. So again, we're backing a lot of times people who haven't been CEOs before, but look for people who can show demonstrated success in whatever role role they are. I'll let Brennan kind of, if any other thoughts on what makes a great operator.
I think transparency, humility, and the core values. We stole from Lencioni. So anybody that's read that book, it'll sound familiar, but it kind of came rung true. And hustle. I mean, it comes down. This isn't easy. It's a hustle game. This has kind of been a goal of mine for a long time, and honestly, we've made some missteps about how, when Andrew first came on, we were talking about, how do we kind of get this ETA, kind of create a resource for people that want to buy a company, and quite frankly, maybe even find out if they want to buy a company, because kind of see how it's done. So next month we're launching. We're going to open our space in Midtown. It's right next. It's right next to the current Jumpstart facility. They're going to be moving over across the street in the next 18 months or so. But we really are trying to figure out how to help this community. Obviously, it's a little bit self-serving. We get to meet some wonderful people, and we get to see some deal flow. But it's amazing how often we get deals that there's nothing we can do with them. It doesn't meet our criteria, and we know that there are people in this room that would be interested in them. So we're trying to figure that out. I don't know if Ken Patesey's in the room, but we're kind of working. We're working with him to try to figure that out. And so our ask here is, if there's a need, we do have databases. We'll have extra room. We have some cool. We're trying to make it cool. But whatever you can do in Midtown. But that is launching next month. We'll have that open end of next month. There's another. We're taking about 5,000 or 6,000 square feet. We only have 7 or 8 people, and then there's another 4,000 or 5,000 square feet on the other side that the owners of the building are willing to hold open to see how what we can turn this into. So, part of the reason is to have these discussions is to learn about what we could do, and what groups like Manufacturing Works and other organizations can do to help the people in this room find these little companies. What we've also I'm on a roll. I'm going to go one other thing. I missed something earlier. We went back and looked at our data, and in the 26 deals or so that we've done, we have over 90% success ratio of winners versus losers if we stay close to home. And I'm going to throw Chicago in that because we have a pretty solid base there. But if we stay kind of Chicago, Indy, Southern Ohio, Pittsburgh, up and around, 9 out of 10 of our deals turn out to be pretty good. We had a moment in time when we're a very small staff. We decided to do deals kind of all over the country, and we had less than a 50% success ratio. So, we're just backing up the truck on this idea of kind of building these resources. You have somebody like Andrew, young person that he can just wear a lot of different hats, gain a lot of different experience in a relatively short period of time to decide what he wants to do, and it's also extremely valuable for us, right? Because we get to he's had his fingers in a lot of different things. He only works 80 hours a week, but that's good. So I'm done with that.
So as part of, we talked about this entrepreneurial space build out, we want to create opportunities to share some resources that we have access to with folks in our community. A couple of these are Zoom Info, which is a great way to learn and get contact information on local businesses. So it's a way to kind of contact and find businesses that could be in your target market. We also have access to Axial, which is a private deal network for folks looking to acquire businesses. Businesses are already listed online, and then Prequint, which is an investment data company that provides more financial data on certain potential targets. These are things that Scale has access to, and as we continue to build out our space and resources, want to find out ways we can allow more people to participate in that. So if you have any questions on some of these resources, you can reach out to Holly Smith and for more on how to utilize some of these tools.
It's interesting. These databases aren't cheap, so they're 25,000 bucks. I think Zoom Info and Prequint and some of these other things, and as long as Holly's sitting over there, but as long as somebody from our office runs the lists and does kind of can use it, that's within our license to have that sort of thing done because it's within our business model. So, we just those sorts of things are hard to come by. Maybe Case Western has those things for the students, but.
So I remember when I was learning about ETA, I just wanted to learn as much as possible and didn't really know where to start. So wanted to share some resources that I've found helpful in getting up to speed. A couple of podcasts. Acquisitions Anonymous talks with 3 investors, operators about deals weekly that they're looking at. You get to see how they think about, is this a good business or not, and understand what maybe goes into some good acquisition criteria. Think Like an Owner is a podcast that interviews a lot of folks who are investors and operators, including Brendan, who was on last year. But Alex Bridgman does a great job of talking through the different models of search and ETA, lower market private equity, holding companies. It's a really good way to understand more about this business buying space in general. And Acquiring Minds is similar in where they're going to interview folks who are people who have invested in companies as low as 100,000 in EBITDA all the way up to 100 million. So you get a really good understanding from CEOs and investors on the landscape of buying businesses. A couple of books. Buy Then Build does a great job of going through the process to buy a company, from how do I find a target to how do I exit, and all the steps in between. Shows what a standard LOI or an IOI may look like, non-disclosure agreement, and really gives a lot of detail around a lot of those things that may be harder to find resources for. I put the HBS Guide to Buying a Small Business in that same category. Very detail-oriented with checklists and information on how to buy businesses. And then Search Fund and Entrepreneurial Acquisitions is also tailored toward some of the folks coming out of the MBA programs who are doing a search fund, but still has really good awareness of how value is created in these businesses. And I highly recommend all 3 of those. We also were pretty avid big readers at Scaleco, so I'll let Brandon talk about some of his favorites over the years.
Yeah, I mentioned Traction earlier by Gino Wickman. It's I think back to what we could have done if we were running better meetings and and using the same language. That's really what it is. It's when you read the book, you're going to be like, oh my God, it's so simple, it's never going to work. But in fact, it's so simple. That's the reason it does work, is because it's so simple. I think it's if anybody's heard of EOS, I think 10 years ago, I think I was the first person to take the certification in Cleveland. I think there's 20 now or more. I've lost track. It's a great way to look at running a small business. Ideal Team Player is. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that we stole our core values from Lencioni, and this is the book that kind of outlines the types of people that we're hoping to work with. And you combine that with the outward mindset, and it's just a lot more fun. If you're gonna do this sort of thing and work the hours that we like to work, you might as well do it with the people, using the same language and with the people that you want to work with.
So I've had the fortunate pleasure the last couple of years being able to bombard Brendan with a lot of questions on his experience. So we want to make sure that we had ample time for folks who have questions, no matter where they are in the ETA journey, or general questions, to just kind of answer questions fairly informally. So we just want to make sure we can be as helpful as possible for folks who are considering setting this path.
Please.
Yeah, we're gonna pass the mic. A mic's coming.
Thank you. Brendan, for you, what's been the biggest challenge or hurdle, not only growing Scaleco, but as far as working with other entrepreneurs and helping them scale their businesses? And for Andrew, for you and your journey thus far, what's been one of the best things you've kind of learned, or something that you didn't have understanding of through your previous experience that's helped you manage and scale a current company that you have right now?
Yeah, the biggest challenge is it's just hard to do. You have a $5 million business. It's just really hard to have the resources to do things relatively quickly. And then the greatest, I think the aha moment is it's all people. I mean, at the end of the day, if you've got the right people, things tend to work out. And even if they don't work out, they've reinvented the business to the point where it's still a great experience. And that's really, the journey is the reward. It's sure nice to have some money at the end of it. It's really important to have the money at the end, because that's, how this is sustainable and so forth. But it really is, I mean, the journey's a reward. I think about, we have a company called Budco Financial, and we originally invested in 2012. Puny little business, one customer. it was about what the value was, but we also, took us longer to diversify the customer base than we've. Took us 11. We've recapped it a couple times. It was a pretty profitable business, but I look back on that experience, and it's just the people you met, the people there, they're just great friends. They're just, it's just been fantastic.
I think for me, it's also about the people. I think I came in with fairly strong analytical skills and had read all the books about here's how you create value in a business, and that more book knowledge and practical knowledge. And it's really how do you motivate folks every day to show up to work and want to be their best selves with so much going on in their personal life. So I found the most rewarding things not to just be, we had a great quarter, but I was able to promote this person to a new role, which would be great for their family. So I think that the most rewarding and challenging part comes down to the people management aspect of the job, but that's something I didn't have. I've gotten a better appreciation for now being in that role. There's a question over here.
When you bring on investors, do you fundraise deal by deal, or do you open the fund, or do you plan to open the fund? And then if you do deal by deal, do you try to have that locked in even before you put the LOI in, or are you kind of balancing both at the same time?
Great question. We're in the process of raising $150 million. We've already closed, so we have a fund. The 150 is 60% the foreign people that I mentioned to you earlier. So it was led by them and the family office in Chicago. So we hope our goal would be to get 150 million put together for this fund. Prove out the model that we can put that money to work here. The platform companies have to be in the Great Lakes states, but the add-ons can be anywhere. And so we hope to be able to grow that in the next fund. We did just hire a talented young person from Riverside who's helping us kind of think through some of those things, because it's you do need to add the talent that has seen things in more volume than we've historically seen it. But we were challenged in 2018 by the core investors, and I say core just because they tend to like what we do, and so my favorite core investors. But they challenged us to not only buy the smaller companies, but get more capital to work. So in the last 2018, I mentioned the Budco transaction. We eventually got about 15 million of equity in that deal. We had a company called Federos that we sold to Oracle that we got about 14 million in. And so we're like a lot of the kind of more true lower end smaller funds. We are going to, the goal is to get 15 million, 10 to 20 million dollars in the good deals, in the ones that are really hitting their mark. But I think having a committed fund's pretty darn important. I did it for a long time without it, but it's really nice to have it.
I'd say for folks who are looking to raise on a deal-by-deal basis, you definitely want to have investors around kind of before the LOI phase, know what they're looking for as well. A lot of times brokers, if you are an independent sponsor or someone who doesn't have a committed fund, they're going to look for some kind of comfort letter, understand where your money is coming from. And if you have a group of investors that you know what they're looking for, you can give them a high level update of the deal. They may be willing to write that letter for you. So if you are going down the non-committed capital fund route, it is helpful to have partners who have capital.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned a couple markets that Skelco focuses on. Can you share what's been revealing itself to you with rates being the way they are, the local economies? What's been kind of revealing itself to you as far as opportunities that that's going to cause you to want to go to those particular markets? You mentioned Pittsburgh. You mentioned Southern Ohio. What's been showing itself to you lately?
So I think it's a good question. We've found that staying local allows us to really build a community of folks that can help out the portfolio company. And so we've tried to find markets where there's strong talent, strong opportunities, but that are also drivable from Cleveland. So it's much easier if we need to get out and support, be able to just drive away versus having to fly to like a Seattle or a Vegas or something like that. So I think a lot of it's been geographic.
We are trying, and it's wonderful that we followed Cheryl's presentation, sorry to keep, but we're trying to buy companies that a lot of the criteria that Riverside looks for, we are trying to buy companies that aren't quite there yet, but we feel like through our operational excellence, we can get there. And so, she mentioned the EBITDA arbitrage. We buy at 3 to 6 times EBITDA. 6 times if it's a little bit bigger and it's got maybe some less issues but we believe that the companies we buy, when we get the operational changes done, should trade in that 8 to 12 to 14 range if we get there. So we're looking for the recurring revenue, diversify the customer, the checklist. Hopefully you guys all take a picture of that. But that's what when we put our plan together, we're trying to tackle those issues. Many of our companies don't have them when we buy them. They mentioned earlier we had a company that had one customer. We didn't pay much for it. Arguably we paid liquidation value, but it was also the customer was Ford. It had a long-term contract. It was making $3 million a year, and we thought we could diversify relatively quickly. It took us 9 years, but in the interim, we were getting paid pretty well. So. Where's the?
You sort of answered my question, but can you give us a couple of examples? You were talking about being a resource for other business owners, of like some examples of why business isn't a fit for you. And I think you kind of answered that a little bit just now.
Yeah.
But yet a good business maybe for a closely held or something like that.
To us, it comes down to growth. I mean, can we, the size matters in the valuation game. If you buy a company that's $2 million of EBITDA and you can get it to 5, that's a different pricing level. If you can get it to 10, that's a much different pricing level. And so to take advantage of that EBITDA arbitrage and the valuation change, it's got to grow. And a growing company with predictable cash flow and all those wonderful things, that's where people will pay you, right? It reduces their risk. And some companies are just harder to get that, right? You see a lot of wonderful niche manufacturing. I'll use the company that I bought in 1998, STAM. We bent and fabricated large diameter tubing. It was crazy capital intensive. I think my son, who's 22 now, it was 8, he's walking through the facility and goes, "Dad, how much did all this cost?" I'm like, ugh, even an 8-year-old can figure that out. You know what I mean? So it wasn't a business that we really could turn, I think we grew it from, went from $1 million to maybe $2 million of EBITDA, but it was just, you just have a lot of inventory and a lot of receivables and big buildings, and it's just tough.
I think to that point, there's that business or type of business like that may be right for the right buyer, right? If something is going to generate $500,000 to $1 million of free cash flow every year, that's a great business. If that's kind of what you plan to make your money doing, it may be harder if you're looking to exit for a much higher value or got to return a bunch of capital to limited partners. But for the right person, that it's not necessarily a bad business. It's just not right for our model. So we want to find ways to be able to share those opportunities with other folks in the community.
That's actually something we're talking to Ken Patesy about, is something that manufacturing works could do, and we're really in the kind of beginning stages of how that would all work. But we do see some wonderful little companies that just don't meet our current criteria, and we see some wonderfully talented entrepreneurs and operators that we'd love to figure out a way to get stuff to work. I mean, you go back to the STAM, the manufacturing business. It kind of returns 6 times capital over a long period of time, and IRRs were in the mid 30s, but it's tough. So yeah, he said.
Yeah, I feel like the white shirt right here.
Just took 3 hours, but we did it. I'm gonna give a little bit of background. They're gonna ask the question. So I am a new entrepreneur. I'm trying to make a business online. So this is considered a technological business. When I was filing the paperwork for the LLC, everybody was saying, in Cleveland, we have a lot of funds for minorities. We have a lot of funds for Hispanics. We have a lot of funds for Black Americans. That's a lie. I haven't seen not a single one. So I've been trying to been trying to put my money into try to invest in the business, but the cost is really high. The websites, the marketing, the cybersecurity, all of those things. And the more we advance in the business, the more money it requires. So the question is as following. When a person who has a great idea, because everybody's telling me this is a multi-millionaire business, and he needs some money to come from either a grant or a loan or whatever, what will be the steps for that person to create that, to connect with those funds that supposedly exist, but people like me can't find it?
It's a good question. So we could talk offline. I'm happy. In terms of the entrepreneurship through acquisition phase, there are a decent amount of smaller funds that do focus on backing minority entrepreneurs. I'm happy to get you their info. It sounds like it may be like a more startup venture, which at Skoko we typically don't look at, but there's a couple of players in town. There's Jumpstart, there's other folks, and so I'm happy we can connect offline. I have a list of VC firms as well that are in the area. That'd be helpful.
What I would say also is that when I was putting together the first deals, and I still have a copy of the decks if anybody wants a copy of them. It's amazing people gave me money. But what I think happened was that I would go ask somebody and they would raise 15 questions, and I would go answer the questions and put it in the deck, and then I'd go talk to somebody else, and it wasn't quite that kind of symmetrical, but I would just kind of keep solving the I got this solved, and I eventually kind of you got to have somebody willing to listen and ask the questions. But I almost found that was the way to solve some of those problems, is just kind of, and that's the only way I've been able to overcome that.
One in the back right there.
Thank you guys for the presentation. One thing that I'm noticing in your presentation today is just the sense of mentorship and partnership as well. So Brendan and Andrew, a question for both of you. I know there are some MBAs in the room interested in this path. Just curious the advice that you would have for an MBA student, or I think there are even some high school students here as well, but just thinking about your journey together, whether you consider that mentorship, just what advice would you have for a student, going to pursue this? And Brendan specifically, just it's great to see you kind of reaching down and pulling up, if you will. So some perspective on that as well.
You want to take the first part?
Yeah. So I think for me, after being introduced to Brendan, I knew fairly quickly I wanted to work at Skoko, and even if there wasn't a job at the time, I knew that's what I wanted to be. So I tried to figure out ways that I could create value in the short term, whether it was offered to work on nights and weekends for free, or
which I said I'm all in,
or just making sure I knew about their model and was able to, I feel like, hit the ground running on day one. So if you want to work at this particular place, understanding how you can help create value like day one, and just making sure you're staying in contact with that firm. So for me, again, there wasn't a role initially, but I knew I wanted to be there. So I was trying to figure out how frequently could I contact Brendan without it being annoying, to just get coffee and see some support. So I figured about every month or 6 weeks, I just kind of ping and see what's going on. And over time, when the role did open up, I was, I think, evaluated for that, because we just had built that relationship. But I think just trying to identify if there's places you really want to be, what the needs are of that organization, and then figuring out ways you can fill that fairly early on.
What we're trying, I had an experience when I was in my mid to late 20s where I had this wonderful boss. He was from the old Polish community in the northwest side of Chicago, and he and his friends would include me in discussions. So I felt, I would sit there and watch these guys talk about deals and how they put things together, and I was just like, man, if I could ever have that as my job, that would be fantastic. But it was being included in the room that was the gift, right? I mean, I was there, and then I would take the initiative and say, hey, what if I, could I, do this? And so what we're trying to do, and we need a lot of help, because I mentioned earlier we kind of had a misstep where we tried to kind of maybe move a little too fast, but we're trying to figure out how to get more people in the room, how to get more people. Andrew kept banging on the door, and eventually, can I tell the story? Yeah, he eventually called and goes, I don't care what you pay me. And I go, well, I'm not going to pay you. He mentioned a number. I'm like, we'll do better than that. But I also knew we need to get him up to a certain number, relatively, probably slower than he wanted. But I think the key is trying to figure out a way to get people in the room, and because it's like when they see transactions, it'll give them ideas of how to do it themselves, right? Because right now, most people haven't had the privilege of seeing that, and I got my first experience by watching the old Polish crew on the northwest side of Chicago pull that together. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, and I think that's the best mentorship when you're actually seeing actual deals. Are we time wise? One more? Is there, there's one back there, or? Oh yeah. Maybe we'll do. I'll stop talking as long as we'll go 2 down. Yeah.
As a guy with the tie on, in sales, you gotta differentiate yourself, right? No, but a lot of my question revolves around. All right, you've done the due diligence. You bought the company. Day one, what are you guys doing? 30, 60, 90 days once you get in the door.
It's a great question. We have, like a lot of other groups, have a 100-day plan. We lead with EOS. We lead with a finance team, because numbers are everything. I mean, it's just there's too many times we've gotten to deals where the numbers don't make sense. I mean, you do diligence, and then there's like that transition period where the flow isn't there, the KPIs aren't there. So it's numbers, it's EOS, and it's kind of executing on the plan. I mean, it's not. That really is it. I mean, we invest in a lot of different kinds of businesses, but most of them are driven by some similar metrics, right? About getting the numbers in order, getting the sales team together. I remember I wasn't going to talk as long. Many of our companies don't have sales forces when we buy them, so we have a process to get that going, and we're going to do those things. Many of our companies don't have marketing plans or kind of true, and we'll put those together. So that really it's a lot of heavy lifting in the first, year or so. We have one more, and I know we have to be done by 1:45, so we have
one more in the way back, back right.
How are you guys able to apply EOS principles to your diligence process? Because rather than just layering them in once the acquisition is completed, are you putting those in through diligence?
It's a great question. A lot of our companies, there's not a banker, so we actually get to work with people for for a long time in advance. We have a baking list, we call it, where there's something interesting, we'd like to work with them. Innoplast was the founder let us in the door and kind of started letting us do it before we bought the company. Interestingly enough, wonderful guy, if you look it up, but he actually came to me the day of closing and kind of told me that after really looking at EOS, he didn't really want to do it anymore. And so, that's fine. I'd rather know that right now, right? And but absolutely. And I think it's a book, right? People can read it and decide whether they want to do it or not. And I think it's a big barrier. And also, a lot of people think they want to stay on after, they give up control of their company or a company, and it kind of forces them to be held accountable. So it's been wonderful for us. Speeds up that decision-making process. And with that, we're right on time. So we're happy. Look, we love doing this. We're trying to figure out how to do it in more scale. We'd love your input. A month from now, we'll have what I think is a pretty cool space. We'd love to have anybody visit.
Thank you all.
Or chat with Stephanie.
One second. Thank you very much, Brendan and Andrew. I've got just a little something here for each of you. Small token of appreciation for your time. I know everybody really enjoyed that. One more round of applause for Brendan and Andrew.